Welcome to the Business Credit and Financing Show. Each week, we talk about the growth strategies that matter most to entrepreneurs. Listen in as we discuss the secrets to getting credit and money to start and grow your business. And enjoy as we talk with seasoned business owners, coaches, and industry leaders on a variety of topics from advertising and marketing to the nuts and bolts of running a highly successful business. And now, to introduce the host of our show, financial expert and award-winning author, Ty Crandall.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's event. I'm really glad that you could join the show today. Today is going to be a really exciting show because we're going to have a very special guest talking to us today about a topic that I know of no other experts in this space. And I was so intrigued by his message and what I felt he could deliver to you with value and content that I tried to get him on. I've invited him on a few months back. And I'm really glad he could finally make it because, he just had a newborn baby a couple months ago that's kept him pretty busy. So he's actually put aside some time with us today to dive in, dissect what he does, and I'm really, really, really honored to have him on. So today with us is Jefferson Lilly. Now, Jefferson is a mobile home investment expert, educator, and industry consultant who's been featured in the New York Times, Bloomberg Magazine, and on the Real Money TV show. Prior to co-founding Park Street Partners in 2013, Mr. Lilly actually spent 7 years investing his own capital at Lilly & Company, where he acquired and continues to operate mobile home parks in the Midwest. And prior to becoming an investor full-time, he actually spent 10 years in sales and leadership roles with several venture-backed startup companies in Silicon Valley that were even acquired by Open Wave Systems and VeriSign. So a lot of experience in the entrepreneur area. And earlier in his career, he even held operational roles at Viacom and was a consultant with Bain and Company. And he also holds a BA from the University of Pennsylvania and an MBA from the Wharton School of Business. So very, very, very smart guy. So Jefferson, thanks for coming on today, man. I'm really, really excited to have you.
Well, Ty, thank you so much for having me. That was quite an illustrious introduction, and whatever I'm paying you, I'm doubling it.
Well, I try to only get to the important points, but you have so many important points that I still condensed it, and it still could have been half the podcast. But I'm really glad that you're joining us today.
Anyway. Yeah, it's great to be here. I'm talking to you from a very sunny, temperate San Francisco today.
Oh, nice. I was just out in San Diego last week. The weather was beautiful out there when it was even cold down here in Florida, so it's gorgeous weather out there.
Oh. Yeah, indeed. Good day for a podcast.
Yeah, well, listen, let me ask. I kind of dove in a little bit to your past experience, but now how long have you actually been an entrepreneur for?
Yeah, great question. So I've been doing this full time for just coming up on 8 years. Now, I bought my first park about 9 years ago when I was still working in high tech. And so I overlapped. I didn't have a clean break. I didn't ever sort of give up the sexy, stock options in Silicon Valley and say, hey, I'm going to go buy mobile home parks full time. I bought one as really a passive investment. And over the course of about a year, that property did better and better. And unfortunately, that last startup kind of continued to waffle. So I transitioned into it over the course of a year. But yeah, 8 years full time now, just investing and, again, buying mobile home parks is my niche.
Well, that's really interesting, especially for me down here in Florida, because we have tons of mobile home parks down here.
Sure do.
As many as we have and as many real estate investors that I've had the opportunity to speak with, you're the first and only guy I've ever talked to that really specializes or has a specialty in this kind of investing. You have to kind of have a pretty rare niche, I would think, right?
Yeah, this is the quintessential, niche real estate. Yeah, there are, my guesstimate is there are only about $1 billion worth of mobile home parks sold every year. Whereas single family houses and self-storage and apartments and all that, I don't know, is certainly, I would guess, hundreds of billions.
Oh, yeah.
So, so this is a very small niche, but it has some very compelling industry dynamics. And so, I'm obviously not a big Wall Street guy. I'm not trying to deploy, $1 billion a year into this niche. Then I'd have to buy every trailer park that comes up for sale. Yeah, we're just kind of buying, right now we're kind of on path to be buying about $20 million worth of property every year. We're growing, but that's still a fairly small portion of that $1 billion worth of parks that comes up for sale every year. So we can, be picky and buy the right stuff and generate a good return for ourselves and our investors. And, life's pretty good.
Well, yeah, and I appreciate you coming on and openly sharing with us kind of what you're doing and a little bit of how you're doing it.
Yep.
Because again, it's so interesting. I mean, what got you started in this? I mean, what was it that got you interested in the beginning, and kind of how did you get your start initially?
Yeah, so I've, always been an investor. I bought my first stock, I believe, when I was 17 and, needed to have my dad co-sign the trade ticket. I won't tell you how old I am, Ty, but this goes way, way back before the days of the internet and just, hitting the return key on your keyboard to buy stock. So anyway, always been interested in investing and went through the dot-com boom and bust and came out of that really with the worldview that value investing was really the right way to go, certainly for me. And I've always been a big Warren Buffett fan. And so I started looking around now about a decade ago just to get out of the stock market, well, or diversify some out of the stock market. And I always thought, well, why don't I buy some real estate? And as Buffett would say, you stay within your circle of competence. I had always lived in a house or an apartment building. So I figured initially I was going to buy an apartment building. And, I don't mind working. So I was generally looking for properties that might need a little TLC, new kitchens for the tenants, new carpeting, what have you. I figured I'd make it better for the tenants and also bump the rents, make it better for them, better for me. But anyway, just in looking online at places like LoopNet, under multifamily, I would see, 99 apartment buildings at about an 8 cap, which basically means yielding 8% if you paid all cash. And then there'd be, a trailer park at like a 10 cap or 11 cap. And, I remember the first time I saw that, I thought, that's absurd. I'm not buying a trailer park. And I deleted the search result and, did the next search, again and again, Omaha, Nebraska, Peoria, Illinois, Tulsa, Oklahoma. Anyway, finally, after getting hit over the head 3 or 4 times with this multifamily niche that seemed to yield much more money, I then just finally got interested in it and started, buying books and tapes and going to seminars and just talking to folks in my world and intentionally seeking out some folks, I guess, that weren't in my world. But I just kind of built up an unofficial advisory board of about 10 guys that all owned mobile home parks. It makes a lot of sense for a couple of reasons. And so that's really what shifted my interest from apartment investing to mobile home parks. So, most of your listeners are probably familiar with, why it might be a good idea to buy a mobile home park, right? But buy an apartment building. If you buy it on leverage and, you buy it right, you're going to do pretty well. You get some depreciation. You've got a bunch of different tenants in there. You got some diversification. So mobile home parks have all that, everything that an apartment offers and more. And the more is a couple of things. First, they aren't making any more mobile home parks. It's basically illegal or really against zoning pretty much everywhere to build any new mobile home parks. So that's a very interesting dynamic. The supply curve is not only fixed, it's actually shifting inward because actually about 1% of mobile home parks get plowed under every year and become, a sexy apartment complex or a shopping mall or what have you. So the supply curve is shrinking. And again, demand continues to grow at about 1% right along with population. So you've got some very favorable sort of macroeconomic tailwinds there with shrinking supply. Obviously, folks that are being forced out of any existing mobile home parks have got to go somewhere, so they're infilling the remaining parks. Anyway, and then, your tenants tend to frankly be more responsible than your average apartment renter because they own their own house. So obviously they're paying you the rent into the land, but that means that I don't have the level of maintenance costs that I would on all those proverbial leaky toilets and leaky roofs, because again, the tenants are responsible for those improvements. And, lo and behold, when somebody owns something, they tend to take better care of it. So anyway, the maintenance costs are lower for me. They're lower for the tenants because, again, they own their house and treat it better. And then we get to, help build a community of folks with pride of ownership. So lot of benefits there over like traditional multifamily apartment investing.
Yeah, it sounds like it, and it's so interesting you say these things because I hadn't even thought of any of these things until you mention them. But the plowing them over is something we do see in Florida because if you see any mobile home parks on the water here, they are a
Yes.
target. I mean, these investors will lay out big money to buy these things out in order to knock them all down and build massive condos complexes. So I completely see that. And so when you're handling a mobile home park like that, then I guess your role of maintenance has to do with the land, the driveways around the park. I mean, because I never really thought of that before, that your level of maintenance is so much smaller. So what is it you're actually maintaining then?
Yeah, it's really just the land. And if any of your listeners kind of think through their repair and maintenance budget and think about, again, what you've spent on basically what's above the land, on the land, versus what you spend on what's below the land, in the land, you'll see that it's probably, 75% of your expenses are on the improvements, the proverbial, four walls and leaky toilets and leaky roofs. We just maintain the land. And that basically means we cut the grass. We fix potholes. Maybe every 10 or 15 years, we repave a road. And then we're doing some sewer unstops. And of course, paying the taxes on the land. But yeah, our expenses are relatively low. It's really just sort of the regular mowing and the, occasional sewer unstops. And then, every several years, we might be doing some repairs on the roads. Pretty simple stuff.
Now, you mentioned several things throughout this. You mentioned investing in the stock. You mentioned investing into regular single-family homes and actual apartment complexes or multifamily type properties. So, compared to that, I mean, why would somebody? And you've given some great reasons, but why would somebody invest this way versus in those other avenues?
Yeah, investing is always about kind of your risk reward tolerance. And, this is a very low risk business. There are a couple of three publicly traded companies, REITs, that own mobile home parks. They tend to have a beta of about zero point 0.6. That simply means they're far less volatile than the stock market. So we think that's indicative of the market as a whole. We think and certainly our empirical, evidence bears this out. There's just always demand for affordable housing. Even during the housing crisis, at that point I owned just one property, but we remained between 95 and 100% full right through 2007, 8, 9. And actually I bumped up rents in that property during that time. So there's just always demand. You don't have to worry about a customer, going away, or certainly not the market. Individual customers may come and go, your tenants, but there's just always demand for this business. And then we're able to generate, certainly, let's say 20 or 20 something percent rates of return. So we just think that's a dramatically better investment than, for instance, putting your money in the stock market, where at least over the long run, I think the stock market has returned about 8% and obviously is more volatile, has had some real down periods. And, you never know when the next one is coming along. So we're able to invest in a business that pretty much never declines significantly and just really always kind of cranks out 20% returns. So we just think that's about the best thing going.
Yeah, I mean, 20% return, it's hard to beat that with any kind of investment. So what do you think is one of the most important things you've learned along the way? I mean, it sounds like you've learned a lot, and you went from owning one property, 7, 8 years ago to now how many do you own?
Right now, with the partnership now that I've formed a couple of years back, we're now up to 10 properties, and we've actually got three more that we're closing over about the next 3 weeks.
Wow.
So it's we're on a bit of a tear, but we don't normally close a property a week, but the next 3 weeks are going to be pretty
It'll
busy
be a
for
busy
us.
3 weeks. Well, I appreciate you fitting
Yeah,
this in amongst this completely chaotic time. Well, what do you think?
yeah.
What do you think you've learned? I mean, what's one of the biggest lessons you've learned along the way from your first property to where you are now with nearly 13?
It's really kind of, a worldview or a perspective that I have now that I didn't when I got in. And, frankly, whether any of your listeners ever specifically do mobile home parks or some other sort of real estate or some other business, I had to evolve from really thinking of myself as an individual owner operator to now thinking of myself really as being, a money manager So what I do now, the way I've been able to grow beyond just those first couple mobile home parks that I bought with my own money is I've now raised money from other folks. And that just took me, 5 or 6 years to really kind of even begin thinking about growing beyond my own relatively limited capital base. So, the mind is a powerful thing. And it wasn't until I really started thinking about growth and how to do that with other people's money that my growth really took off. I bought, again, the first two properties over about the first 6 years in this business. And now we're closing them at least over the next 3 weeks at the rate of one a week. But we'll probably realistically be, buying, call it 6 a year, something like that. But anyway, so I've been able to grow really by just changing the way I think about my role, my relationship with the parks and with other people.
Yeah, and that's important because that kind of was something else I was going to mention or ask is, what do you do? I mean, you can't get mortgages, I wouldn't think, or financing on these, so you'd have to pretty much come in with cash. And I think you've answered that question is initially you got started with a lot of your own money, and then one of the biggest lessons it sounds like you've learned is that you don't need to do that. You can use other people's money, and with 20% returns, there's enough money there to be able to get other people to invest and then give them really nice rates of return. And it sounds like that's exactly what you're doing.
Yeah, we're exactly. We're helping other folks get into the business. They don't need to actively, of course, manage it. That's what we do. We do get mortgages, typically around 75% on the properties. And again, now roughly that 25% outside equity capital comes from other investors. And then, of course, we split up the returns between us after we pay our operating expenses, which are relatively low, and pay that all important mortgage,
Yeah.
which is probably as big as all of our operating expenses combined.
So,
But once we get those two things paid, then there's money for everybody left over.
so then you can actually get a mortgage on the park itself.
On the land, you sure can. It can be harder to get a mortgage or a loan on the mobile homes. There are a few banks that will do that, and certainly if that's in conjunction with them placing a loan on the land. But yeah, this is classic real estate, right? It is real estate, and you can get a mortgage on the land. Again, just a little trickier on the houses, but that can be done.
What about mistakes? I mean, we've talked about one of the biggest and most important things you've learned, which is great. What
Yep.
about mistakes? I mean, what do you think is one of the biggest mistakes you've made along the way?
Again, aside from just not coming into it with kind of a bigger worldview about really managing money for other folks, those first couple parks that I bought were much rougher than anything that I'm buying now. They have varying amounts of private utilities, either well and or like a septic system. Those can be expensive to maintain. So I would say for anybody that's considering getting into this business, don't buy a mobile home park that has any private utilities. You want to rely on the government to both provide the water and the sewer service, and that enables you to focus on really, again, just maintaining your land, but again, without those additional potentially expensive utility investments.
And for anybody that's even thinking about doing this on their own, I mean, for me, from my perspective, it seems like it would make more sense to get with someone like you as an investor and invest into what you're doing and see how it works that way to kind of dip their toe in the water than take it on because it seems like a massive commitment if you don't know what you're doing. And like you said, it took you 6 years to obtain two properties because you had so much to learn. And then once you figured that out, you were able to buy substantially more. So to me, that would make more sense. But, you'd mentioned something earlier that leads me to kind of believe, do you run then kind of like a mastermind for people that are interested in doing this? Or do you just mainly deal with a group of investors and help them invest and make money on it that way? Or do you kind of run a mastermind coaching type of organization where you help other people get into the business?
We do help other folks get in the business. Yeah, we've just launched the world's first mobile home park podcast. It's simply called Mobile Home Park Investors. And so we take folks through the basics of this business and, diligence on properties, managing properties, how to find and finance a property. Anyway, so we are helping folks with our Mobile Home Park Investors podcast. And then we do, I do also spend time on the phone with folks almost every week. We've partnered already on 2 of those 10 deals where other folks that wanted to learn this business found good parks, brought them to us. We all put up capital, and we're now training them how to actually run those properties. We talk with them weekly, or more often if necessary. But typically, we have a weekly call with those folks to, help them get through what needs to be done: fixing houses, getting a website up and running, getting the roads maintained, what have you. Anyway, so we're happy to partner with folks that may have found good deals and, again, jointly own properties. We've also had some discussions with folks about, they might just flip a deal to us. We're happy to pay referral fees on properties as well. But yeah, we definitely help folks. And then on our website, we've also got a resources page. That's just at parkstreetpartners.net. We've got a resources page there for folks, and they can, again, find all sorts of articles and other industry information if they're interested in getting into the business. So we definitely help folks.
Yeah, that's phenomenal because like I said, I think you have a very interesting niche. I don't know of anybody else that really does what you do, and it sounds like you cover all aspects from having a podcast where you're teaching other people to do it to having a kind of a referral affiliate type program where you're paying people just to bring you a lead of somebody that might be interested to actually, having somebody just invest and not do much more than invest, all the way through to working with somebody one-on-one through the process of them actually managing the park. So it sounds like you kind of all have all your bases covered. And, for the listeners, just so you know, on the actual show notes page for this podcast, we'll actually have these links to this resources that he's mentioning. So don't feel like you've missed anything if you didn't get a chance to write down the name of the podcast, his website, or even loop.net, some of those resources that he'd mentioned earlier. So let me ask you this. I mean, when you got in and bought your first park, did you need a lot of your own money initially? And is that still the case today where people need a lot of money to get in?
You can get in, I would say, with 25% down. Banks will lend 75% loan to value. Sometimes it's 70, sometimes it's 80, but 75 is probably a pretty good average. Now, if you get lucky, if you really work it, make a lot of phone calls to sellers and find a seller that might be willing to offer seller carry, that is, they basically take back the mortgage, then your down payment can be much smaller. I've heard of folks that have gotten parks for 10% down, and again, a motivated seller that then says, "Hey, you can pay out the remaining 90% over time." So when you can get the mortgage from the seller, then really anything is possible. Where you really need to have some dry powder, though, is if there are any homes that need to be repaired. A lot of the parks that are for sale haven't been well managed. And so that, presents opportunity. But indeed, if you're buying a park that has, 10 abandoned homes there, that can easily be $5,000 a piece to do rehab work. So that could be 50,000 that you'll need to put in the houses. Now, certainly those houses then you can rent or rent to own in most markets for anywhere between $500 and $700. So you get a very good rate of return for investing $5,000 in a house. Again, as far as what you can take, maybe 1,000 or 2,000 down, and then again, say rent to own it for $600 a month. But you just don't want to be underfunded. You don't want to get into the business and say, "Oh my gosh, now I've got 10 houses. This is going to be, like permanent vacancy if I can't come up with the money to rehab the houses." You as the landowner, really, in almost all markets, you need to do that for your tenants, for the market. You're providing affordable housing. Most of these folks can't afford $5,000 to fix a house, no matter how good of a deal it would be for them. So again, you need to be prepared to have that kind of money for each of the houses. It's going to be very difficult to get bank financing on that. You just need to come out of pocket that amount of money per house on average. So just be aware of that. You might get, again, much higher mortgage on the down payment, buy a $100,000 park for 20 or 25,000 down, but you may then need 50,000 to, say, rehab 10 abandoned houses there.
Yeah, which is big money. I mean, based on just simple math of what you're talking about a scenario where you're making your money back in a year in rental
Oh, yeah.
those properties. So
Yeah.
everything else is gravy. So it's almost like you'd prefer to find a park that has a bunch of abandoned properties because that might be, it sounds like a substantial part of the return that you're earning.
Yeah, that's a great way to add value. And, obviously you're helping deserving folks become homeowners. We've done this in most of our parks where there's some number of abandoned houses. They're not livable. Folks in the community can't afford to fix them up. But again, we front the cash. We get the houses, refloored, repainted, maybe repair some roof leaks, install some double pane windows, what have you. But we turn something that's really useless to society into something that's very useful. And we might sell a house like that then for say 10 grand, and somebody will put down a couple $1,000 and pay us out the rest over maybe 2.5, 3.5 years. So it's a win-win, right? Somebody gets out of an apartment and paying rent forever and probably paying more rent than our, say, $600. They're going to come into our house. They're going to actually own it. They're going to get out of the game of paying rent, at least on their house. They'll still pay the lot rent. Most of our communities, that's now less than $300. So we're helping folks become homeowners and bring their cost of living down from, apartments in most of our markets are on average somewhere around 850. And again, we're helping folks become homeowners in a single digit number of years and bring their living costs down to, say, $300. So it's a great win-win for everybody.
Yeah, it sounds like an amazing opportunity. I mean, there's just a lot of ways that this makes sense. So people need money to get in and try to do this on their own. I mean, regardless, you're using whether you're doing seller financing, whether you're getting a mortgage, if you're not going through someone like you that's able to invest a little and be able to get a smaller chunk, then it sounds like it's going to take a lot more money down to be able to get in. But I mean, what about that person that has $1,000 or $10,000 and says this makes a lot of sense? I've got a little bit of money, 1,000, or I've got maybe even what they consider to be a lot of money of $10,000, and they want to get in. I mean, is there a place for somebody like that to still earn a return with something like this?
Yeah, there sure is. This business has a fairly easy on ramp, as I call it. And so, if you've got $1,000 and you're willing to, make some phone calls and network a bit, you can probably find a park somewhere with an owner that's frankly just too busy to rehab any of those abandoned houses. So I know a guy that got started with a house. He may have even gotten the house for free, the mobile home, not the park. He just got a mobile home. But he said to the owner of the park, hey, give me that house that's just sitting there rotting. I'll fix it up. And then, I'll pay you lot rent once I get it fixed up in another, 2 months or so. So he was able to concentrate his relatively limited funds, which I think were on the order of 1,000 or maybe 2,000. He was able to concentrate that on fixing up the house. And then again, he put it out, I believe he rented, or he may have done a mix of rent to own and rent. But he generated a good return for himself. He had a couple $100 a month coming in from that house that he might have only had a couple of thousand in. The landlord, again, has now got a fixed up house and is collecting rent on the lot. And, again, somebody out there who was looking for housing has now bought him or herself or that family, a newly renovated mobile home. So that's a great win-win-win for everybody if you can find an individual mobile home that, again, say a park owner can sell you or give you, and then you fix it up. This gentleman then grew that business up to about 50 mobile homes that he owned. So he had 50 little, couple $100 rental income streams coming in. And then only after he did that, getting to that scale, only then did he start buying mobile home parks. Now, we advise that folks own the land. That's really where the better economics are. But if you need to get started really small, then again, you can do that just with an individual mobile home and scale up. And, pretty soon you might have enough capital to buy even, say, there are modest, 5 and 10 space parks out there that might only go for 10 or 15,000 a piece. So, it's not impossible to find some smaller parks for 50 or 75 grand. And again, then you try and work your magic persuasively with the park owner and say, hey, I'll pay you, say, 60 grand for your park. I'm going to give you 6 grand down, 10%. You carry back the remaining 54 grand, and I'll pay that out over, 10 years. And then you've already got the experience. The real heavy lifting is in renovating houses. Again, operating the land is nowhere near as difficult as renovating houses. So if you've already cut your teeth on the hard part of the business, you'll then find it fairly smooth sailing. If you can find one of those small parks, you'll have no trouble then operating the park once you've cut your teeth on the house side of the business. So that's another way that folks can get started fairly small. And then, of course, you can always do what we do, which is with, other people's money, OPM. If you do just see a small park for, 50, 75 grand, maybe you have no money. But again, look for somebody that might be able to put up 10, maybe 20,000 for a down and say something additional if there are houses that need work. And then you guys just figure out how you split the economics of that. Somebody else puts up the money, you do the work. Now you're in the business for $0. So I've heard of that happening too.
I mean, some brilliant strategies, and I think it's the first time on any show I've ever actually had that happen. Where I mean, you've literally laid out two or three really viable ways to get into the industry and to own and to get massive returns without spending hardly any money. I mean, even if you're talking about putting a couple grand in, based on the math you're describing, you're getting that money back in the course of a year, and the rest of it is just gravy that you could then turn around and use to buy more and more. And along the way, you're building relationships with the owners of these parks, setting out the path for you to take that next step of actually buying the park. So, I mean, some brilliant,
Yep.
brilliant strategy. Well, let me ask you this. I mean, if you could go back and do this all over again with what you've learned, what are some of the things beyond what you've already kind of given a lot of insight on? What would you do different now with the knowledge that you have?
I think I would have bought a larger and better quality park. Again, one on city water, city sewer, and one probably closer into a major metro. And I would have worked less and I probably would have earned less money, but I think that's a fair trade-off. So I would have bought, yeah, just a better quality park, cut my teeth on that. And then instead of sort of waiting 5 years or six to think about partnering and raising outside capital, I think I would have done that, say, after a year. I would have had a year track record. And again, I think I then could have started raising outside money and buying parks probably in year two rather than year 5 or 6. So that would put me about 5 years now.
Well, what about in one of my closing questions here is, what's your best general overall advice? And you've given us a lot of advice, but we've got people here that you had never even thought about this, never even thought about owning a mobile home or a mobile home park until they hear you. And now all of a sudden, their head is swirling with all of these ideas, and they're thinking, well, wow, you've talked about a lot of concepts, a lot of ideas, a lot of ways I could possibly get into this. So what's your best overall advice to somebody that's listening, thinking about jumping in?
It's a combination of both, just get into the business, but also, I don't want folks to go off, half cocked and sort of go, ready, fire. So there needs to be some aim in there, ready, aim, fire. You need to also learn about the business, but just, get into this business or whatever business you're going after, do a reasonable amount of research and learning, but don't let that be an impediment. You can never learn everything about any business, right? So you got to have a good balance there. Don't be the guy or gal that just goes to, real estate trade shows forever and ever and never actually buy anything. So, get educated, go to some of the shows, but set yourself a reasonable timeline. Buy a property. You won't know everything about the property or everything about the business, but your learning will accelerate greatly. And again, if you can then also build kind of an unofficial advisory board of folks that are already in that business to help you, again, all that will accelerate your learning. Then you'll do your second deal. It'll be even better, and your third and your fourth, and you'll be off to the races. So get educated on whatever you're looking to get into. Get educated about it, but get into the game as well. Don't just keep, reading books and going to seminars. Actually take action within a reasonable amount of time.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, this has been really eye-opening. My head is spinning. And so let me ask you this. I mean, if people want to get with you, if they want to bring properties to you that they think might be good, if they want to invest money through your network and then be able to kind of get a piece of the pie, I mean, you've got a lot of different angles you've talked about of how to get into the business here. So what can they do? What steps should they take next, and can they take to get in touch with you, to check out your podcast, just to get more details?
Sure. So we've got information both for prospective investors, again, as well as for individuals that might want to buy a park. So wherever you are in that spectrum of wanting to invest passively versus actively own your own park, we've got information for you on our website. It's at parkstreetpartners.net. And then we'd also encourage folks to sign up for our podcast and also join our LinkedIn group. And you can find all that at mobilehomeparkinvestors.net. There are links there to our podcast, which is called Mobile Home Park Investors, and there are links to our LinkedIn group, which is the biggest of its kind, which is also simply called Mobile Home Park Investors. But all that can be found off the webpage, mobilehomeparkinvestors.net.
Well, I really appreciate you coming on the show today. And just so everybody knows, I will share these links on the show page so you don't have to actually write those down if you didn't get a chance to. I will share them on the actual page so you can just click through and get access to everything, including the iTunes show, the podcast, the LinkedIn group, the websites. But Jefferson, listen, I really, really appreciate you coming on, sharing with me today. I mean, this is the first of a kind. I've never done a show like this before. It's so eye-opening, something I hadn't even thought about before I met you, to all the way soups to nuts to how to actually do it. So I really, really appreciate your time and you coming on, openly sharing with us the way you have today.
Well, Ty, it's been great to be with you, and I'm glad if I've opened your eyes and some of your listeners' eyes to this niche. And as I say, we're open for business at Park Street Partners, so we hope to hear from folks and are happy to help.
So make sure everybody listening go to mobilehomeparkinvestors.net and parkstreetpartners.net. A great amount of resources and a lot of different ways that you can get into the business and work with Jefferson and his team to actually be successful. So make sure you check out those resources. And again, Jefferson, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
Thanks, Ty.
You've been listening to the Business Credit and Financing Show with your host, Ty Crandall. Watch for our next episode to get even more insight on financing and growing your business. And don't forget to check us out online at creditsuite.com for even more business growth strategies.